Hello, 7th grade. We're talking today about circles. So I have some notes here coming on the board. What you might want to locate and pause the video while you search for these. There's 2 circle homework papers, and as part of the notes I'm going to give you 2 free answers on both. There's one picture with circles drawn. There's another page that is like a big grid with stuff about circle words. So if you want to pause the video and find those, go ahead and do that and come back to me in a minute. But the first thing I would do if we were here in class is ask for people to remember some circle words. So circle words we've talked about this year. A point like this is called the center. The center is the same distance from every point on the circle. If we had a compass to draw a circle, the center is where the metal part would jab into your paper before you trace the circle around that. If we travel from the center to the circle, that is a distance called the radius. The radius basically goes halfway through the circle. If we go through the center but go all the way, that's called the diameter. The diameter is always doubly as big as the radius, or another way to say that is that the radius is half the diameter. And then the circumference is a fancy name for perimeter, but only for circles. Circles are the only shape that has a circumference instead of a perimeter. The circumference goes around. When we were together, we learned 2 formulas that we memorized to use. The circumference of a circle was pi times the diameter. The radius is pi times the radius squared. And we talked about pi being an interesting number because it's a never-ending, never-repeating kind of decimal. 3.14 is about what pi is equal to, but it goes forever. There's no end or repeat. So when we used our formulas last time to do these together, we were multiplying a lot by 3.14. Today, I'm not going to even make you use the 3.14. I never do when we get to the review part of the year. There's a shorter way to write these problems that I'll show you in a minute that I think you'll like because it cuts down on your multiplication. So what I'm working now is the picture paper. So on the picture paper, the first thing you'd have to decide on the pictures that I've drawn you is whether I drew you a radius or a diameter. For this first problem, the first picture, that is a radius. The radius goes halfway through. So the radius is more likely to help you get the area done. So what we would do to get the area done is we would take the radius times itself, which is 4, and then we would multiply by pi. Instead of doing out 3.14 times 4 today, I'm just going to have you write 4 times pi. That's it. When we write numbers next to letters, and pi is a letter, it's a Greek letter, but when you write variables, letters, next to numbers, that means they're multiplying. So instead of doing out 3.14 times 4, just put 4 pi. Let's do the area on this other one. I'm skipping down a picture. So if I go down a picture, this picture I didn't give you the radius. I gave you the diameter because that goes the whole way through. So what you have to do to figure out the radius is to cut that in half. Half of 24 is 12. For this picture, the radius is 12. To do the area, we need to obey the formula that has pi times radius squared. Take 12 times 12, which is 144 for your times tables. And then to multiply by pi, instead of doing out this giant multiplication problem, just put a pi next to it. That means that it is multiplying. And we'd be okay with that for the numbers. I will criticize both of these answers in a minute, see if you can think of why right now. But these are only partial answers. For the circumferences, we want to rely on the diameters. So a question like this is probably better for circumference because we have the diameter. So if I want the circumference, I take the diameter, which is 24, and I need to multiply by pi. Instead of doing out a big multiply production with 3.14, from now on, we're just going to put a multiply by pi next to it. And that's going to just be a little easier for our life. If I go back to this one, this was a little harder because I didn't know the diameter, but I could figure out the diameter. The diameter would go the whole way through, which is 4. So the circumference would have a 4 trying to multiply pi. And in a strange twist, those ended up being the same. That would only happen for that circle. Any other number other than the 2, and those would be different numbers. I would now criticize all 4 of those. I would ask you to think about why have I criticized those. Might some of you come up with the answer. If you want to think about it, pause and think about why I'm criticizing all of these. And then when you would unpause, here is the answer, is that the picture had units on it. So I need to remember to put meters on these answers, because the picture had meters, the answer needs meters. And this picture that had centimeters, I need to put on centimeters. However, I would still criticize 2 of those answers. So you could pause the video maybe and think about which 2 and why if you want to seek that out. Once you unpause, the reason is that area always does square whatever's. Square meters, square centimeters. Usually we've done little 2's more often, but the SQ works also if you've always preferred that. One thing I will point out to you on the picture paper, I don't always do C then A, C then A. Some of the pictures have A then C. I scrambled the order on that, so make sure you're always doing the circumference system with the diameter leading you to circumference in that space, and the radius should always lead you to the area. Sheet 2, it's the same idea, it's just on a sheet, not with the pictures. So I'm going to do the line that has 5 inches on it, and I'm going to do later on there's a line that has a 22 meters on it. The idea is if I give you radius or diameter, you should be able to do the rest. So if the radius is 5, the diameter for that problem would be 10, because the diameter is always twice as big. For the question where I use the 22, you'd have to go back to an 11, because the radius is always half the diameter. We can use one to figure out the other. Circumference on your paper lists the formula to take pi times the diameter. So this would lead me, this diameter leads me to a circumference of 10 pi. This would lead me to 22 pi. Area has the formula pi times radius squared. So to do this square, I need to look back to the radius squared. 5 times 5 is 25, and just stick a pi on it. For this square, I'd look back to the radius. 11 times 11 is 121, and stick a pi on there. We're almost done. I would criticize every answer that I wrote. If you're not sure why, pause and think about it. And then when you unpause, I would tell you that if one of these lines has inches, the whole row has to have inches. And if one of the items that I give you has meters, the whole row needs to remember to have the meters. And that's better, but I still criticize some answers. You could pause and think about why. And when you unpause, maybe you came up with the fact that the areas need the little 2's on them. So the homework is to do those 2 papers, and then we'll tackle some other shapes and other ideas in this kind of an area, no pun intended. Perimeters and areas and volumes and surface areas is coming up the next few days. Today is circles, best wishes 7th grade.